This video is going to look at the influence of public schools, of the social and cultural section, which, let's be honest, is done really poorly by the textbook and the revision guide. As always, we're going to maximise our marks by looking at the latest mark scheme answers. Please subscribe to the channel. So, we need to understand the background sort of information here. So a lot of people kind of fail to understand that public schools have been placed between, on a timeline, pre-industrial Britain and post-industrial Britain, because really what was going on in public schools is a reflection of what was happening in society at the time, but also, and this is, if you look along the top where we come to public school boys once they've left the public school, so ex-public school boys, what they went on to go and do then really helped to transition and push forward almost the codification of rules and the development of sports, what used to be called rationalisation. So understand that is kind of the point of why public schools, and therefore the influence of public schools on making sports and pastimes much more organised. So the thing to understand, and I still show my sixth form children the first half an hour, 40 minutes of Tom Brown's School Days. So go ahead and watch that. The one with Stephen Fry is particularly good. It just kind of sets the scene, because a lot of students, unless maybe you go to a boarding school, which I can't imagine will be many people watching this video just because of the amount of people in state schools, then you're not really going to understand what is meant. It's just such an alien world. So go and watch that if you have really little understanding of what we mean by a public school. So at the beginning of the 19th century, so we're looking in pre-industrial Britain here, organised sport was not a feature in public schools. The headmasters were not in favour of sports, and pretty much boys were just sent off to public schools. And of course we're talking about upper class boys here, maybe middle class as we get a little bit further on. They were just sent off to school. Yes, there were teachers, but they were just left to their own devices at night, because teachers weren't seen as responsible for the children. So therefore there was massive amounts of bullying and brutality, and something that we call the fagging system, okay? And this is a system whereby the older boys, maybe think of like boys in year 13, who were allowed to really boss about and give jobs to like the year 7s, if you will. And this was a normal, quote unquote, normal kind of feature and system at the time. So then what we need to understand, and this can always come up as like a 1 or 2 marker question, that the Clarendon Report was brought in. So loads of parents were really getting worried about the treatment of their children at school. So Queen Victoria commissioned an examination of the 9 leading public schools following complaints, including many criticisms of specific advice for schools. So arguably the first Ofsted-style inspection of its time. And really worth almost having in your back pocket a couple of these public schools, the names. I don't think you necessarily need to know the year founded, but you do need to have a few of these schools up your sleeve, ready to bring in to an exam question. So the focus then kind of turns to Rugby School, because this was where they were experiencing the changeover of a new headmaster. So Dr Thomas Arnold came into the school. It's important to understand that he was previously a priest, or a man of the clergy, a clergyman, okay? So he was coming into Rugby School at a time where there were massive amounts of bullying and brutality, and he couldn't really understand what was going on, and it really went against his moral beliefs. So he started to bring in his reformations, okay? I've highlighted in bold the important things here that would really go on a flashcard. So the headmaster of Rugby School wanted his pupils to grow up as moral Christian gentlemen. Therefore, he revised or got rid of the fagging system and promoted more regulated sports, which provided exercise and encouraged healthy competition. What also it did is help tire the boys out, so they were less likely to get up to mischief when they went back to the house. So Thomas Arnold developed a house system, which was influential in the formation of competitive sports teams. He also instigated, should I say, the prefects who organised sports, maybe house or inter-house sports. He developed the idea of muscular Christianity, which then linked to them being Christian gentlemen. He established links between sports and games, the moral and the ethical characters, which we'll come on to, and then he developed the concept of the cult of athleticism. Now, the cult of athleticism is a very, very popular question, and you need to be able to almost roll off the tongue that this is a combination of physical endeavour and moral integrity, backed up by being honourable, truthful and showing good sportsmanship. And it's really quite a common question that comes up a lot, whether it was the previous specification or this new one. So the cult of athleticism, the cult being like an idea or a group, and athleticism, that physical ability. And essentially, Dr. Thomas Arnold wanted people to compete in sport for the glory of God. He wanted them to do the shaking of hands. He wanted them to be all about fair play and sportsmanship, and really believed in the value of sport. Now, you can pause this, just put a previous question here so you can see how maybe all of the points so far might come together, and I'd go ahead and make a flashcard of these points at this stage. Popular sports that we need to be aware of that were very much regular at all public schools to use in your exam responses. So rugby, cricket, tennis and athletics. Now within these, Dr. Thomas Arnold had values that he wanted to bring out in the boys. And I've made this super easy for you. I've already taken this from the mark scheme. Let's just go through a couple and again pause here and make this into a flashcard. So Dr. Thomas Arnold wanted the boys to be brave and show courage, for example, going into bat against the opponent's best bowler in order to develop courage and bravery. He wanted to show loyalty, having pride for helping your house or school football team. That could be rugby team. Of course, we've not really developed rugby and football just yet. Sportsmanship and honesty, trustworthiness, and then later down this table, so leadership, being captain of the football, rugby, cricket, tennis team, whichever one you want to pick. Teamwork, playing cricket for your house or school enable you to develop those communication skills, and ultimately showing respect, accepting the referee's decision in rugby, which is probably why if you compare today's version of rugby versus football, okay, they're trying to make changes, but in rugby, it's still really only the captain that speaks to the referee. They refer to him as sir. So almost the long-standing traditions and almost etiquette and culture within the sport has very much stayed true to today. So those are their values. Then we need to understand how the public schools, as I mentioned before, when the boys have left, how that's then contributed to the spread of sports and pastimes. So again, nice and easy, taken from mark scheme answers. The ex-public school boys, now sometimes we refer to them as old boys. They went on to become army officers, and when they have been in the army and obviously then travelled abroad, they have taken the games and spread sports through the empire. Now, if you think of the Commonwealth Games, and if you have very little understanding of that, go ahead and look into that, because ultimately that's the reason why we have the Commonwealth Games. This word again, so clergy, they became men of the church, spread in their parish. They set up factories and became industrialists, therefore set up factory teams. And then probably the most important one that we'll see on the mark scheme, they went on to universities whereby they would have set up national governing bodies and codifying the rules. Now, just further on that, because we're seeing this more and more. So the idea of the melting pot idea. What we need to understand is that national governing bodies were formed really as a result of all these boys going to different public schools, ultimately ending up at a university whereby previously, so let's look at the slide here. So Eton would have played their own version of what they thought football looked like. Harrow would have played their version, Winchester, Shrewsbury. And let's say I put rugby onto here, they would have played more of the handle and kicking game. So really, all their rules are going into a pot and everyone has to play by the same rules. So ultimately, and later, probably after the Industrial Revolution, if you think of time-wise, at Cambridge, they established a uniform set of rules that we now know as the Cambridge Rules, that will have triggered the formation of the FA in 1863. So like I say, we can't play a game of football or rugby or we can't play tennis or cricket unless everybody's playing by the same set of rules. So let's just say that again, you put almost the rules, the ingredients into a pot. You've got to stir the pot and come out with one set of ingredients, one set of common rules. And that's why really then the games were codified. Now, just following on from that, again, we just need to be aware of different versions of what were going on. We also had the Amateur Athletics Club. Again, look at the time frames here. It's very much post-Industrial Revolution. So the AAC, which was established in 1866. The RFU, so 1871, a little bit after the FA was formed. And the LTA, established in 1888. So again, as a result of all these public school boys going off to university and standardising, so really everybody was playing the same version of the same sport, which then has a massive knock-on effect in terms of sports and pastimes moving forward. So lastly then, just because we want to be prepared with all sorts of questions, how they might link, and we've seen this, how they've linked public schools to the Olympics. So here we are, the mark scheme. Again, I don't need to read all this out to you, but look at the links between like fair play, respect, the morals, the education. They're talking about the inspiration from the public schools. So worth noting this down, because it'll only be a matter of time before this question is put back into the system and retested on.
So, as always, there's do now task.
So, going back to the do now task. Do now, create those flashcards for the key information, find your past paper questions for public schools, and as always, subscribe for more help with your PE topics. Good luck, everyone.